Hello and welcome. This presentation is on behavior analysis in the classroom, and it covers three main points. The first point is the requirements on developing and updating behavior intervention plans as per the SOPM. The SOPM is a Standard Operation Procedure Manual, and this one I'm talking about is for New York City Department of Education. The second point is understanding behavior analysis and the implementation of behavior intervention plans in the classroom. And finally, monitoring behaviors and students' progress. So basically, based on the SOPM, behavior intervention plan is developed once the functional behavior assessment is completed and a determination is made for the necessity of a behavior intervention plan. Functional behavior assessments are initially conducted by the IEP team using direct and indirect assessments. Indirect assessments are parent and teacher interviews, and direct assessment could be ABC charts, student preference assessment, etc. ABC charts are used as direct measures to create behavior intervention plans and also used to monitor progress. We will cover ABC in a moment. Behavior intervention plans include behavior analytic strategies to use in the classroom. Strategies focus on manipulation of students' immediate environment in order to reduce problematic behaviors and teach replacement behaviors that serve the same function. We will cover what is function when it comes to behavior analysis. What do we mean by function? Behavior intervention plans are usually implemented by crisis management paraprofessionals. Ongoing data collection should be done using ABC charts. ABC stands for Antecedent Behavior Consequence. Progress monitoring sheets are to be completed on a fixed schedule as determined by the initial behavior intervention plan. So when we create the behavior intervention plan, we are asked to specify how often we'll revisit the plan and how often we're going to look at the data to discuss if anything needs to be changed in the plan on how we manipulate the student's environment to reduce from certain behaviors or increase certain other behaviors. Behavior intervention plans could indicate that we will revisit every 4 week, 8 week, or 10 weeks, or whenever we feel is appropriate for the student and for the behavior we're trying to work on. Of course, we share the modifications and the review of the data with the parents every time we look at it. So if it's every 4 weeks, we do contact the parent for a meeting every 4 weeks. If it's 8 weeks, we do that as well. When we create the plan, we start to implement it. The first time we have to revisit is after 2 weeks. So basically, what we asked to do is to start implementing the plan, and 2 weeks after the first time we started the plan, we have to revisit, look at the data, and discuss if anything needs to be changed, or if it's too early to change it, or if it's not working. The behavior intervention plans are to be updated at annual reviews if necessary. So as per the SOPM, we are asked to look at the behavior plans every time we have an annual review with the parents and the IEP team. So for special education teachers or related service providers who are conducting annual reviews with parents should be looking at behavior intervention plans to decide if anything needs to be changed and update the plans if necessary. Of course, plans are updated only based on data collected not based on opinions or 1 or 2 days of data collection. It has to be for the time that was specified on the initial behavior plan. If there's no need for an update progress, the monitoring sheet should indicate that behavior intervention plan is working and no modification is needed. Parents and teachers should be familiar with the behavior intervention plan, and they should make sure of the consistent implementation of it. On triennials, when students are due for reevaluations, functional behavior assessment are conducted and behavior intervention plans are updated if new problematic behaviors are displayed. So every 3 years, when the student is due for a reevaluation, functional behavior assessment can be done, and most of the time it will be needed to reevaluate students' behavior. And after 3 years, we see a lot of changes in students' behaviors, and therefore we need to see if behavior intervention plans are still necessary or not, and if they are, what behaviors are we trying to target at this point. Usually, FBAs and behavior plans after 3 years or every 3 years are easy to do, because if you're continuously collecting data and analyzing it every 8 weeks or 10 weeks, you already have data collected throughout the whole year, and you know the student well, and you know what behaviors you're working with, and it's not a new evaluation where you have to collect data from the start. It's an ongoing it's an ongoing progress that you're monitoring. Second point here we're going to talk about is understanding behavior analysis and the implementation of behavior plans in the classroom. So what is the ABC chart is based on, and why we collect data when we try to create behavior plans, and where is this all coming from, what's antecedent, what's behavior, what's consequence. So behavior analysis is based on the science of behaviorism. And behaviorism is basically to believe that our behavior is shaped, increased, and or decreased by our immediate environment. What we mean by environment is what comes before and what comes after the behavior. So antecedent means what happens before the behavior you're targeting, and the consequence is what happens after the behavior. We mentioned the word function at the beginning, and each behavior serves a function, and there are 4 main functions of behavior. So basically, function means a purpose, a reason for behavior. We face a lot of behaviors in the classroom, and many times we hear the statement that this is coming out of the blue, or I cannot tell the reason why this is happening. I've tried everything, and the student is still behaving in a certain way. Sometimes we see a student engaging in a behavior in one class and not in any other classes, and we don't know why this specific class triggers the behavior. So that's why collecting data on behavior is very important, and a function of behavior is really what causes a behavior. So there are 4 functions of behavior, and any behavior that's happening and can be observed and can be measured should fall on one of these functions, or maybe multiple of them. The first one is attention. So the consequence of the behavior is usually some form of attention from peers or adults, such as yelling, laughing, etc. So when you have a kid who's engaging in a certain behavior, and the consequence of his behavior is adult attention, it could be in a shape of yelling, laughing, screaming at the child, running at him, restricting him. A lot of different ways to provide attention for the student could cause the behavior to continue in the future. So we basically are enforcing the behavior by giving attention right after he engages in the behavior. And again, people sometimes think yelling or screaming at a child is a punishment, but what we believe as behavior analysts is that, based on also behavior analysis, is that when the behavior continues in the future, then it's being reinforced. It's not being punished. If it decreases, then it was being punished. So it really depends on what happens in the future. So if your student continues to do the same behavior, even though you're screaming at him afterwards, or running after him, or running to him, and he continues to do it in the future, that means you're reinforcing his behavior. Most of the time, we do reinforce behaviors, however, we're not really aware of it. Escape is the second function. The consequence of the behavior is usually a change in the environment that lifts the previously presented demand of the student. So this is an example here. Student is kicked out of class, given a break, sent to the dean's office instead of completing math assignments. So for example, if you're a math teacher and you're starting your math assignment, and this kid started to yell out, or started to kick his peer. And what you do is usually ask him to leave the class and go to the dean's office. Or maybe you go to him and tell him, okay, why don't you take a break and you don't have to do this first assignment. Or you can call the dean and tell him to come and take the student. In all these cases, your reaction to the behavior caused him to not do the assignment, and therefore he escaped the assignment. So you're also here reinforcing a problematic behavior, which will make the student most likely continue to engage in the same behavior he engaged in, so he can get a break or get kicked out of your class. And escape basically meaning that when a demand is put on a student and then he acts in a certain way, and then he is asked not to do whatever he was asked to do in the beginning, then here there's a function of escape. Tangible is a third function, and the consequence of the behavior is usually a preferred object or activity. So basically when the kid gets something that he likes, toy, candy, computer time, a certain activity that he really likes, after the behavior. So for example, let's talk about an appropriate behavior. When a student raises his hand and asks for computer time, and then the teacher, allows it. Now, raising his hand and asking is a behavior that will be reinforced, and therefore will continue in the future. So this appropriate behavior is one of the behaviors that we should really reinforce. And so when a student is asking us in an appropriate manner, the consequence will reinforce the behavior, and therefore the behavior will continue in the future. So the third function is tangible, is basically getting what he wants. If the same student is asking for a computer at inappropriate times, like when you provide them with a reading task or writing task, and he raises his hand and he says he wants to use a computer, and you continue to give him the time for the computer, that is still reinforcing, and therefore the student might not do your classroom work, because every time he's, even though he's using appropriate behavior to ask for a computer, it's inappropriate because of the time. He's not really completing his assignments. So it's really important to differentiate between enforcing an appropriate behavior at the right time and not all the time. Automatic and not socially mediated, such as sensory stimulation, rocking, jumping, scratching. So a lot of students who have autism will have a lot of automatic behaviors, and automatic means that the behavior is reinforced, but not through another person, and it's not socially mediated. So He could be alone in a room and he could be doing it, and so as I was saying, automatic is basically a behavior is occurring without anybody mediating or providing any reinforcements. So when we do function analysis, we usually call the condition a lone condition. So we leave the student alone and see if the behavior occurs or not. And if it does occur every time we leave the student alone, then that means it's not socially mediated and it's automatic, and it has to do with sensory stimulation. So these are the 4 functions of behavior: attention, escape, tangible, automatic, and any of the behaviors we observe or see should be falling under one of these 4 functions. And the next step we usually do is we observe some more and try to manipulate our environment to understand which of these serve as a function of the behavior we are looking at. So using ABC charts, this is just a sample of how a form might look like. It's usually more complicated than this. It should have a list of choices. However, you can also use a blank form, because if you want to just write exactly what's happening word by word, and you want to be very thorough and precise, you can use a blank form like this one. Some other forms will list what happens after, like the consequence. It would list choices of getting attention from adult, getting attention from peer, escaping like a task, getting sensory stimulation. So it would just list things that you can check off if you don't have to write, if you're in an environment where you can't really have the luxury of sitting there and type and writing everything. Like if you're a teacher and you're trying to take data, you cannot be teaching and writing everything down. So a list of choices could really help teachers who are trying to collect data if they're, of course, teaching a class. So they can just check, when they have a kid who's engaging in a problem behavior, they want to see what happens after the behavior. If his peers are giving him attention, she can just check getting attention from peers as a choice. So, there's different kinds of ABC data sheets. So we use ABC charts, and it helps us to determine the function of the behavior when the problematic behavior usually happens. So when you do an ABC chart, you would write the time of day and what exactly is the setting. If it's in class, if it's lunchtime, if it's right before leaving school, is it in the bus? So you would write when did it happen, and how long did it last. Also, the SOPM requires that our ABC data charts include frequency of behavior, duration, something called latency, which means what is the time that was between the antecedent and the behavior. So say the teacher is asking a student to do something, and then his behavior is saying no, or kicking his peer. How long did it take from the time she requested something from him and the behavior? That's called latency time. So these are all required per the SOPM to be part of the ABC data sheet. So when we collect data for 10 days and we look at the consequence, and we try to find if there's a pattern of what's enforcing this kind of behavior, we usually find a pattern that tells us what a function could be, what 2 functions could be, part of the behavior. And using ABC data sheets, we are able to kind of hypothesize what the function is. And then after we do that, then we can start manipulating the environment by changing the consequence or the antecedent or both. So what we do is, after determining what happens after the behavior, we can develop antecedent and consequence strategies to reduce behaviors. Reinforcers given after problematic behavior should now be given after appropriate ones. While appropriate behavior is reinforced, problem behavior should be on extinction. So we're going to cover extinction in the next slide. But before we do that, I just want to explain that sometimes we look at the consequence of the, on the data sheet, and we realize that we did provide attention to the student every time he kicked his peer. Even though this kid sometimes acts in appropriate ways, we never give him the attention we do when he does engage in problematic behavior. So what we want to do is to reverse that by giving him attention. Most of the other times he's engaging in appropriate behaviors, and we put the problematic behavior on extinction, which means we will stop reinforcing the inappropriate behavior or problematic behavior. What is extinction? So it's basically the process in which we stop providing the consequence which we used to provide after the problem behavior, and which acted as a reinforcer and therefore maintained the problem behavior. So basically, if we are, if we did our data sheet, we collected information, and we figured, oh, we actually were reinforcing this behavior when we provided the attention we did. So now we're going to stop providing this attention, which means we're going to put the behavior on extinction. So every time a behavior has been reinforced for a long time, and then this reinforcement we decided to not do anymore, we are putting on the behavior on extinction. It's not like punishment. Punishment is different. Punishment is when you punish a certain behavior by doing something after the behavior that reduces the behavior in the future. However, this time you're stopping something that you were doing before, which caused the behavior to be reinforced. What happened in extinction is usually we see the visual, like the graphs when we do extinction, the behavior goes really, really up. It increases, and we call that extinction outburst. So when a student is doing a behavior and he's always getting attention, and then you start the intervention by not giving him this attention, what happens is that he start doing the behavior much more than before, but then eventually it goes down to 0. So there's an extinction outburst. He keep kicking his peer more than once. So if it was once per period, now he's doing it 5 times per period, and then it goes down to 0 gradually. Okay, so a lot of people say extinction was the worst thing we've tried because the behavior just increased rapidly. But what happened is that, basically this is normal. They would go really up and then it will disappear. It's not an easy task, but it does work. The only thing is, when you use extinction, you really have to know when to use it, because if you're using it with self-injurious behavior or any aggression, it's really unethical to do that in many settings, and therefore extinction might not be an intervention you want to use, and there are other ways to do it to avoid any harm. And so let's go to the next point. It says antecedent strategies are developed to prevent problem behaviors. So for example, also you need to work on the antecedent, not just the consequence. So if this kid is doing a problem behavior to get attention, you might want to give him the attention before he's engaging in the behavior. So say your data sheet tells you that this kid engages in the problematic behavior every 20 minutes. Now this is the average of so this is the average of how often he engages in the problem behavior. So what you want to do is, before the 20 minutes are over, you want to provide attention to prevent the problem behavior from happening. So you might want to do attention every 10 or 15 minutes. If he's engaging in a problem behavior right after you provided a demand or an instruction for him, you might want to provide the instruction or the demand at a different time or in a different form. So if you know that your student is if you know it's highly likely for him to engage in the behavior, if you provide the instruction to the whole class, then you might want to come near him and tell him what to do individually, and that would help him. It would help from reducing the behavior. Also, you can give the demand in different forms. So instead of giving him a whole sheet to answer math problems, you can come and say to him, why don't you try the first one, and then we'll look at it together afterwards. So this way you are helping him complete his work, and you are here trying to reduce from a behavior that probably will the function of the behavior was probably escape. So if he's escaping by kicking somebody so he can get out of the class or take a break, you're trying to reduce this behavior by helping him complete his work and reducing escape. So basically, therefore, by changing the immediate environment antecedent the consequence, problem behaviors are usually decreased within a few weeks based on student and the consistency with which the plan is implemented. So again, the implementation of the behavior plan and the consistency are really crucial in helping students with their behaviors. The third point here is basically monitoring behaviors and students' progress. And it's crucial that data is collected daily on problem behaviors using ABC charts in order to determine if plan is implemented accurately and if it's working. So there's no way for you to know if the plan you've written is working unless you actually implement it and collect data on the behavior. So if you're manipulating the environment but you're not taking data, there's no way for you to know if this kid is really being helped or if the plan is really working. So data collection is really important. Also, paraprofessionals and teachers should keep data sheets, continue to understand the function of the behavior, and update behavior intervention plans based on need. So also another thing, everyone who's working with the student should really be aware of the plan, because sometimes we focus on the problem behavior during certain hours of the day or certain classes, and we see that it is decreasing by implementing a plan, but then we forgot to look at the student during recess or lunchtime, and what we see is that the behavior is increasing in other settings or at home, and decreasing on certain times of day because we are actually working on it. So the plan has to be generalized to all settings, and everyone who's working with the student should be aware of it. That's why we do the 4 or 8 or 10 weeks of meetings where parents are present, all the related service providers, teachers, and paraprofessionals. So we all be on the same page and understand the kids' behavior and needs and the plan and what needs to be changed or what needs to be worked on, so the behavior can be consistent across different settings. So if you have any questions, please email me, and thank you for watching.